maybe I feel like this every week, but I'm particularly excited about this morning's topic. I was just talking with someone before the class started, and I think Constantine really is a huge watershed event, life in the history of the church and in the history of the last 2,000 years of Christianity, and it's unbelievably relevant to so many of our current front burner topics. I don't know that it provides all the answers, but it definitely provides most of the questions that we're wrestling with today. So excited to get into this. Why don't I open us up in prayer and then we'll get started. So thank you, God, for your presence with us. Thank you for your word, for your truth, and I pray that you would lead us this morning in your truth. And we're looking perhaps more at history than directly at passages from your word, but I pray that you would, we know that you have also worked in history. You've worked in your word and in your spirit, but you've also been with your church throughout history as you promised to do. And I pray that you'd help us to discern your hand and to discern it in ways that are true as we look at how you've worked through history in the life of the church. And help us now as we look at that this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. So, for some of you, the name Constantine may just be like a fuzzy, I don't even know who this guy is. Does the name Constantine bring up do you have any word associations with the person of Constantine?
Where do you read about it?
Where do you read about it? In history. Either the history of Rome or the history of the church have lots of things to say about Constantine. We'll just get right into this. I would argue there's at least two Constantines. There's one human being, but there's the Constantine of history, who is an actual person who lived in an actual time and place. He lived in the Roman Empire about 300 AD. And there's also the Constantine who is, someone has used the word, a condensed symbol. Like in his life is condensed some huge representative symbols for much of what would come after him. And he is a symbol for 2,000 years of the church trying to figure out what it looks like to be in relationship with human governments. And he has often been demonized, he's been sainted, Constantine can do a lot of things for you, depending on what your project is. So he's a massive symbolic sea change of a person, and that'll be more clear. So there's Constantine, the actual person, and Constantine, the symbol. First, we're going to start out this morning trying to, as accurately as possible, look at the actual historical person of Constantine. Who was he? What did he actually think? What did he actually do? And then I think that will lead us into the conversation of what does his life mean, and what does it mean for the relationship between the church and the state. So who was he? And I need to give credit to a lot of the history I drew from this book. Peter Leithart is a theologian who mostly specializes in a theology of politics. And he's become one of my favorite theologians the last, 4 or 5 years. And he writes a book, he sort of gives away his position a little bit, defending Constantine. But it's a great book. It's subtitled The Twilight of an Empire, that would be the Roman Empire, and the Dawn of Christendom. And we'll be talking a lot about that word Christendom and what that means as we go forward. So virtually none of these ideas are original with me. A lot of them came out of this book and a number of other books. So last week we talked about the period of church history from, say, 70 AD to 300 AD. What was the milestone of 70 AD? What's the super important thing that happened in 70 AD? Yeah, Jerusalem was demolished. The temple was demolished. Jews were actually forbidden under Roman law from living within the precincts of Jerusalem. And so the early church was scattered to the four winds. Judaism was scattered to the four winds. And that time period, it's 70 AD to 300 AD, what is the general condition of Christians? What's the general condition of the church relative to society during that 230-year period?
They're the scum of the earth.
Yeah, generally on the run, living in catacombs, living in caves, very much persecuted, very much on the wrong side of the emperor, on the wrong side of the state, right? There's sometimes when the persecution is more intense, sometimes less intense, but there was no social capital in being a Christian from 70 AD until 300 AD. Anything else that's... The church was growing by leaps and bounds, right? So the statistic we looked at last week, the best estimate, it was growing about 40% every decade. It was increasing in size 40% per decade. So phenomenal growth. In fact, we'll come to this statistic in a minute. By 300 AD, despite massive persecution, Christians made up, we think, about 10% of the Roman Empire, which is crazy to think about. So the background, this is all under we're talking about the Roman Empire, right, of the Western world. The church was also expanding in the Eastern world. It reached China in the 300s AD. It was already in India. But we're talking primarily about the Western world. So the Roman Empire, Diocletian was the Roman emperor who reigned from 285 AD to 305 AD. That's not his birth and death, that's his reign. He had a 20-year reign. And Diocletian, interestingly enough, if you look at just historians of Rome, they generally put Diocletian as one of the best emperors of governing Rome, because he was a good manager. He was. They look at his management style. They're not looking at his relationship toward Christians, because in relationship to Christians, he decreed some of the worst persecution in the history of the empire up to this point of Christians. There's a fascinating story. When he came to power, so there was no such thing as secular society. Everybody was religious. The Romans were very, very religious people. And so every year they would hold a sacrifice, and they would have a soothsayer, a priest of the Roman gods, who would take a cow and they would butcher it and go through its entrails, and he would try to read the future of the coming year based on reading the entrails. And the year that he came to power, they butchered like 15 cows in a row. This is fascinating to me. I don't even know what to make of this theologically. But the head priest says, "I'm not seeing anything in these entrails, so let's butcher another one. I'm not seeing it." Another one. So the gods had gone silent. The Roman gods were no longer speaking to the government, right, to the empire. And This is a crisis in Roman society because they need to hear from their gods. Why do they need to hear from their gods? It's their gods who give them victory in war. It's their gods who give them prosperity, right? This is the thought process. This has always been the human thought process for all of human history. Who's to blame? Why have the gods gone silent? There are also problems going on with the barbarians chipping away at their borders and with taxation and all of the normal governmental problems. But the solution that Diocletian came up with was that the gods have gone silent because there are so many Christians that are influencing so many Romans no longer to sacrifice to the gods, no longer to sacrifice to the empire. So Diocletian instituted a very organized, a highly intentional campaign of prosecution. And killing Christians, in his mind, was an act of public safety, of civic improvement, because it's Christians that are causing Rome to be in decline. Does that make sense? Yeah. I'm explaining his thought process to you, right? So Diocletian declared an edict, an empire-wide edict in 303 AD, attempting to destroy all Christian churches, to forbid all Christian gatherings, to burn all Christian scriptures, and to expel from positions of government any Christians who might have made it into said positions. He issued another edict the following year, 304, saying that all citizens must come and publicly make a sacrifice to Roman gods and the Roman emperor on pain of death. And he did this in order to surface Christians who might just want to be laying low, right? So if you make everybody come and sacrifice, the people who don't come are probably Christians, right? And there were, in this 20-year reign of Diocletian, there were so many Christians killed, so much blood, that it actually began to sicken the Roman populace. They themselves started to have their stomachs turned by all the Christian blood that was spilled during this reign of Diocletian. One writer said this, he said, Christians perished wholesale and in heaps. And yet, the church continued to grow. It's hard to defeat an enemy who isn't afraid to die, right? And in his various 20th century regimes have discovered this, right? that when you exert enormous energy in killing these people and you can't stamp them out, it just by their existence they serve as a rebuke to the empire, right? The one power the state the ultimate power the state has is what? To kill you. And if that even doesn't stop you, then what ultimate power does the state have? It shows the limit of ultimate state power, right? Another author of this time period said Christianity was a communal religion, but not a civic religion. What does that mean? Diocletian wanted a civic religion. Diocletian wanted one religion for the state that would unite everybody under the state, right? That would keep them loyal to the state, keep them patriotic, keep them all of their loyalties with the emperor and with the empire. Christianity divided people's loyalties because they said, we know there's a higher king than Caesar. And so Christianity is communal, it's corporate, we meet together as a community, but it's not the kind of civic religion that Rome wanted and was aiming for with its policies. Does that make sense?
Clearly unenlightened, because he should have realized that your strength is found in diversity.
Yeah, he didn't believe that. Rome didn't believe in diversity.
What is diversity?
Oh, you want to define diversity for us, Buck? The question was, what is diversity?
Oh, well, essentially, the way it's used today, it just means that typically the strength of any culture has been the cohesive values that everybody recognizes and sees. This is normal, this is good, this is what we're aiming for, and everybody shares an ideal, which that's what
Diocletian was aiming for.
So, as long as everybody shares the ideal, that's wonderful. But these Marxists who are infiltrating everything in our society today, they want to forego that ideal, and they want to celebrate the fringe cases. They want to say, oh, well, here's a person who doesn't fit the ideal, but let's celebrate them. And so instead of having an ideal that holds everybody together, now you're celebrating the fringe cases, and it just shatters society. It destroys us. You know, everybody knows instinctively that a threefold cord is not easily broken. When there's unity, there's strength. But they pretend that diversity is strength. We'll celebrate the fringe cases and we'll destroy what holds us together. And somehow we're going to find strength. You know, it's just ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. But that's what the Marxists are trying to do in that day. Well, they weren't Marxists then, but in our day today. But it's the same poisonous belief system that just destroys society. You need a common... I'm saying way too much, sorry.
No, that's good. That's good, yeah. So Diocletian longed for a religiously united empire, a culturally united empire, right? It was a very diverse ethnic empire because it had conquered so many different cultures and languages, right? So it was not, an empire is not inherently cohesive because it's not homogeneous. It's not, you have various races and languages when you have an empire, right? So it doesn't inherently hold together. It wants to inherently pull apart. The Romans knew this, so they were trying to hold things together. And part of, or perhaps the main way of doing that was trying to have a common religion that would unite various diverse peoples. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. This is a little bit of a sidetrack. Christianity actually does unite various races and languages and peoples and cultures under a common king. That's Revelation 5. But it doesn't do it by coercion, and it does it by changing people from the inside rather than coercing them from the outside. So despite this awful persecution of the state, a concerted effort to stamp out Christians, around 300 AD, roughly 10% of the population of the Roman Empire was Christian. And before this time of intense persecution, Christians had already begun to develop a pretty well-organized structure and leadership structure in the church. Now, of course, this persecution was really hard on the leadership structures because it's hard when your leaders are public, then it's easier to find them and kill them, right? But the point being, Christianity was rapidly spreading in the empire. It was too big for the empire to ignore. Right? Does this make sense? Questions, thoughts about this? All of this is prior to Constantine, what we're going to talk about this morning. So, for the past 150 years, Constantine has come into disfavor among non-Christian Westerners, and also he's come into disfavor among a lot of Christian Westerners. we're going to talk about why this new view of Constantine has popped up in the last 150 years. But for most of Christian history, Constantine was thought very highly of by the church. And I think if we fail to understand the 300 years or the 250 years preceding Constantine, it's going to be harder for us to sympathize with Christians at the time of Constantine who were profoundly grateful to Constantine for what he did in changing their circumstances. Because, well, we'll get to what he did in a little bit. Does this sentence make sense?
It'll make more sense.
It'll make more sense in a little bit, yeah. So Diocletian, he's the emperor who is working very hard to stamp out Christianity. He dies. He leaves no son, no heir. By this point in time, part of the instability of Rome is they don't have a good way to have a succession plan from one emperor to the next, right? Previously, they had a better succession plan. By this point in their empire, they don't have a very good plan. The best plan, the most obvious plan, was your son becomes the emperor after you. Even that didn't always work very well, but he didn't even have a son. So there is a bloody scramble for power after Diocletian dies, right? A Game of Thrones kind of scramble for power. And by this point in Rome's history, the throne often went to the person who could assemble the best military force. And so this is what's known in Rome as the age of the soldier emperor. Many of the emperors came up through the army and were generals, and they could muster up their section of the army to try to take Rome. Does that make sense? And that's basically how it happened. That is not to say that they weren't religious people. They were deeply religious, I'm not using these words simultaneously, but they were very superstitious. They were deeply religious. They were not secular in the sense that we use the word. They very much believed in the gods. They very much believed that the gods were necessary. It was necessary to have the gods on your side if you were going to attain military victory. Of course, they still wanted as many well-trained troops as possible, but there wasn't a distinction between the role that the gods played and the size of the military that you could assemble. Does that make sense? So now we come to Constantine. When Diocletian died, Diocletian is the emperor immediately preceding Constantine, right? It goes from Diocletian to Constantine. At the time of Diocletian's death, Constantine is a general in the Roman Empire, and he's in his 30s, mid-30s, I think, and he's off fighting for the empire in, of all places, Britain, modern-day England. And he was very distinguished in his military career. He was a man of real physical courage, of tactical intelligence. He was a very good military general, and apparently a very good commander of men. He could get men to follow him into battle. His mother was, his father was also a general. They came from humble in the Slavic region of the empire. His father rose through skill and savvy scheming to become a general. Constantine became a general like his father. Of course, generals had lots of wives and lots of concubines. Constantine's mother was a concubine from a no-name family, a no-name place. which was sort of a strike against him when it came to legitimacy. But if you have a big enough army, it doesn't matter. Right? So Constantine was from fairly humble backgrounds. He wasn't from a senator's family in Rome, right? He came from the provinces, the remote provinces. So he's off fighting for Rome in Britain when Diocletian dies. He gets, of course, it takes a little bit of time for word to get all the way out to Britain. But he gets word of Diocletian's death, and there is a kind of a mad scramble for power, as you can imagine, in the city of Rome. And Diocletian takes his small army from Britain and starts heading back toward Rome because he thinks, why not me? Right? Why can't I be emperor? There was another guy who got there first, got to Rome first, Maxentius, and he had already seized the throne in Rome and already established himself before Constantine got there. So by October of the year 312, Constantine and his army had marched all the way from Britain through France, over the Alps, down the peninsula of Italy. They're now camped on the Tiber River, which is just outside of Rome. And the Vegas odds makers at this point in time would not have been, it would have been long odds for Constantine to seize the throne at this point in time. He did not have a big army, and he was confronting a well-ensconced, much bigger army with a guy in a fortified city of Rome, right?
Nathan,
Yeah.
should that top line, should that say Constantine?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. That should say Constantine. Constantine takes his small army, because Diocletian's already dead. Right? Thank you. Yeah, Constantine takes his small army and heads for Rome. Maxentius is already there. So it's October of 312. There's a lot of history written about this, because by this point in time, the Romans are pretty good at keeping records. They have historians. So the history on this is pretty uniform about what actually happened.
What would be considered smaller?
40,000 men. Yeah. Yeah.
40,000 men?
Trying to do what?
Just trying to feed 40,000
Well,
men.
you just take whatever you want from wherever you go. That's how you feed 40,000 men.
But going over the Alps with
Yeah.
40,000 men and trying to keep them fed at elevation.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. It requires some organizational genius to pull this off, right? And they're also potentially going to their death, because 40,000 seems like a lot, but it's less than half of what Maxentius had. And Maxentius was in a fortified city, right? So you can already tell there's some natural leadership qualities, obviously. Constantine is not a Christian yet at this point. So he's camped within sight of Rome on the banks. This is the Tiber River. I don't know that that's the same Milvian bridge. It might be. There's a lot of Roman bridges that are still around. What's known as the Battle of Milvian Bridge. This is a painting by Raphael, who's one of the Renaissance painters. So Maxentius, who is the guy who's sitting on the throne in Rome, he has made a claim to being emperor. Maxentius makes what people regard as a pretty catastrophic tactical error. It was coming up on his. This will sound weird because these times sound. He'd been in power. He'd been claiming power for almost 7 years already. Like the following day was the 7-year anniversary of when he said he had claimed power. So he wanted a big victory on his 7th anniversary. So he marches outside of fortified Rome and goes to meet Constantine at the Milvian Bridge, which was a big tactical error because he gave up his advantage of the fortified city. He engages Constantine in battle, and Constantine, against the odds, defeats Maxentius and enters Rome in triumph with the head of Maxentius on a pike. This is all pretty uncontroversial history. This is making sense so far.
Okay, so quick question.
Yeah.
So Diocletian dies, Maxentius assumes.
Grabs
But
power.
it
Yeah.
takes Constantine and his army 7 years.
Yeah, which seems like a long time. I think Maxentius may have early dated the start of his empire. I think part of that is what was going on.
But it took him probably at least 2, 3.
To march.
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably took him over a year
Yeah.
to get from Britain with 40,000 guys all the way to Rome, over the Alps, right? Yeah.
But Maxentius was closer.
Yeah, Maxentius was closer, got there first, basically. And he had his own army, which was bigger.
Why couldn't he overtake because he had a bigger army where he went?
Yeah, he should have been able to defeat Constantine. Providence, maybe? I don't know. Military incompetence. For whatever reason, he didn't win. He didn't defeat Constantine when he probably had most of the things in his favor to do so.
So how long was Constantine there before Maxentius came out to fight him?
I don't know for sure, but I don't think it was very long. Yeah. Okay, so now what gets to the more, okay. So as Constantine marches into Rome with his 40,000 men, it's probably the first, as far as we know, is the first time he'd ever been to Rome, even though he'd been a general fighting for Rome. And he was received, well, the historians always get to write the history, not always, but often. But apparently he was received, Maxentius was not liked by the people. He was the first emperor to actually tax people who lived in Rome. Previously, they just taxed people outside the center, and they were having revenue problems, so he was taxing people inside the city, which made him very unpopular. So apparently they were happy to be under new management, the people of Rome. So one of the first signs that something might be really, really different was this next sentence. So whenever an emperor claimed the throne or had a major military victory, he would always offer, in Rome, he would offer a sacrifice to the god Jupiter, because Jupiter was one of the founding gods of Rome in their minds. And Jupiter was responsible for Rome's security and prosperity. And to the amazement of everyone, Constantine refused to make a sacrifice to Jupiter. Well, this was a big deal. It's not a small deal for him to not do this. What's going on? So this is where history and theology start to get a little bit more murky. Virtually all serious historians of this era of Roman history, among serious historians, it's not controversial. They pretty much all agree that Constantine did undergo some kind of genuine conversion from paganism to Christianity. It's more controversial among the theologians. It's not controversial among the historians. What actually happened? Because we don't have an X-ray machine that can read Constantine's soul, right? Did Constantine become a genuine Christian? So the first, we're going to try to unpack that question. The first great historian of the church was a man named Eusebius. He was from Caesarea. He lived from 260 to 340, so that was a long time for that day and age. You notice he was also a contemporary of Constantine, right? He lived at the same time as Constantine. So much of what we know, at least from a Christian perspective, about Constantine comes from the writings of Eusebius, who wrote the first big history of the church. Eusebius, there was no doubt in the mind of Eusebius that Constantine was a genuine Christian, that his faith was real. Eusebius wrote a biography of Constantine, and this is in Eusebius's history. He says that Constantine and his whole army of 40,000 men, on the eve of the battle for Milvian Bridge, that Constantine saw a vision in the sky, and that all of his army saw it also. There was some kind of cross, some kind of vision of cross in the skies. And again, the thing to keep in mind is no Roman generals were secular, right? They all believed in trying to read natural signs, physical signs, to discern what was going on with the gods, to sort of gauge your chances, right, at success. And so they're constantly looking for divine signs from what we would regard as natural causes. They didn't make a distinction between natural and supernatural like we modern people do. They may have been closer to the truth than we are, but that's another topic. But there were Christians in Constantine's army who helped him interpret this, whatever it was he saw in the sky. They told him, hey, this is a sign from the one true God, and he wants you to fight under his banner. He wants you to fight under the banner of the cross. He wants you to fight for the cause of Christ. And so during this crucial battle for Milvian Bridge, he must have had some time, because on all of their shields, they took off the pagan symbolism and they put Christian symbolism on their shields before they went into battle for the Milvian Bridge, this big showdown with Maxentius. So he went into battle having switched the banner or the symbols on his shields from a pagan one to a cross, which you might think, well, that's just symbolic. What does that really mean? But I want to make the case that in this, in the ancient way of thinking, for most of human history, symbols weren't just symbols. Like, these were really important. They symbolized something very important. So imagine, for example, the King of England who had a coronation ceremony, 2 years ago. Imagine on his robes he had an image of the hammer and sickle, right? Or an image of a swastika. That would be a huge deal, right? Because everything is laden with symbols and meaning. So it was not a small thing for him to enter battle having stripped off his pagan imagery and put on Christian imagery. Number one, if you believe, as all the other generals did, that it's the Roman gods that you need on your side, and you just stripped off all their symbolism, the Roman gods are not going to be happy with you. They're not going to give you victory. Does that make sense? So these symbolic, what we would regard maybe as just paint on the outside of the machine, actually were symbolic of much deeper decisions or beliefs that were held with a lot of seriousness. For ancient people, as for the Israelites, you see this with the Israelites, right? War is not merely a contest of strength of armies. War and victory in war ultimately comes from the strength of the nation's gods. That's what was believed by everybody, right? Victory is the result of divine intervention. Failure is the result of your gods leaving you out to dry. Does that make sense? Okay, so in some ways, we're trying to read the tea leaves. We're trying to discern what's going on inside Constantine's heart and mind, which again is hard to do. In some ways, all that we have to look at is his actions, right? His actions before this crucial moment of the battle for Milvian Bridge and his actions afterward. So after his victory, he openly attributed his victory to the intervention of Christ. We can't know for sure what was happening inside his heart or his mind, but his actions are dramatically different after versus before. On his coins, every emperor minted coins with his image on them. He replaced pagan images with Christian images. That particular image is the Cairo. I think it's it's the first two letters of, I think it's Jesus Christ in Greek. I might be wrong about that. But it was a common Christian symbol. Now, overnight, so this is the big deal from the perspective of Christians. Overnight, he canceled these edicts of persecution and elimination of Christians. And overnight, he elevated Christians from a really rotten situation to being people that he upheld as the standard or the ideal for the empire. It's pretty much impossible to overstate how shocking and dramatic that would have been if you had been a Christian living at this point in time, right? It would, the best analogy I can think of is maybe if you're living in North Korea today and Kim Jong-il dies, and who's been trying to kill all of you as Christians for his whole life, and he gets replaced by a new emperor who says, no, we're going to change we're going to get rid of the hammer and sickle, and we're going to put up crosses, and all you Christians can come out of your caves, and we're going to honor you instead of trying to kill you. That happened literally overnight. It's hard for us to even put ourselves in the shoes of those people, right?
That's not Christian though, on the right.
It is. It's in. These are Greek letters, or Greek or Latin. I should know that, but I don't. They are Christian symbols. They're just in a different language than English. Yeah.
So what are the ramifications whether Constantine was a true believer or not? How does it change the narrative?
So, yeah.
God can certainly work through
Right.
Christian life.
Right. So if we have time, we'll get to that today. Otherwise, we'll get to it next week. There's lots and lots of ramifications. You can already start to imagine ramifications for our current political crisis, our current political situation, right? But we'll get to all of this because I think it's incredibly relevant. So overnight, I shouldn't say overnight, he outlawed the persecution of Christians and began to honor Christians. Over the next roughly decade, he outlawed the gladiator games, which made a lot of people angry. It sort of be like outlawing NFL football because they were barbaric. He outlawed, we'll get to some of the other legal changes he made. In modern times, basically the last 150 years, a lot of skeptics have claimed that Constantine only switched sides from paganism to Christianity to back a winning horse. Can any of you think of any reasons why that doesn't really hold water?
Well, the 90-10 thing.
Right. Yeah, you just made 90% of your population angry by switching sides, right? And they're the ones that have all of the power and the influence. That's exactly it, right?
But the Christians were growing, so did they see it?
They were, so that's one of the plausible reasons given by secular historians. They're like, well, maybe he saw Christianity as a way to unite the empire religiously in a way that paganism couldn't do. I don't think it would have occurred to any emperor that this little sect, which is trying to divide our loyalties to the emperor, is somehow going to unite the empire in a way that 500 years of Roman gods haven't, right?
Usually if somebody says to themselves, well, let me join these people who are being brutalized and murdered, that's not something that you say for pragmatic reasons.
Right.
It's,
Right.
It's not because you're looking for the winning horse.
Right. So Christianity is the losingest horse of all at this point in history, right? You didn't want to be on that horse unless you were a true follower of Christ, right? Because it just put a giant target on your back, right? So, and all the power brokers of the government were all pagans, right? They weren't Christians. So, exactly what you said, Brian. In favoring Christians, he risks offending the other 90% of his citizens, including the most influential ones who are still pagan, right? Who really, really believe in the gods. Constantine's faith was probably not super sophisticated. He sometimes we're jumping ahead a little bit, he sometimes got frustrated with Christian bishops who were having theological disputes over things that he thought were silly, right? There were these theological controversies, and he's like, why are you guys arguing about this, right? But he eventually outlawed pagan sacrifices to Roman gods, which would have really alarmed all of your good pagans, right, in the society, right? And in fact, we'll see later, what's that?
Would that have upset the economy?
Well, in their eyes, the economy and the military and the gods you worship, there's no daylight between any of that stuff. They're all connected, right? Yeah, so they would have been very nervous that you're going to wreck our economy, you're going to wreck our military.
Did they have, like some of the things with sacrifices, was there a lot of buying, selling?
Well, Paul ran into this, right?
Yeah.
When he in Ephesus, right? When Paul, what happened? The silversmiths are like, you're cutting into our market because no one's buying our idols anymore.
Yeah.
And it was the silversmiths who started a riot. It's the exact same impetus, yeah.
So does history say what kind of force he put behind his edicts? Like, so you tell 90% of the population who's pagan, you do this, but with no teeth?
Mm-hmm.
You know, why would they ever listen? So what
Right.
kind of enforcement mechanism?
So that's a really good question. The reading I did, historians were they said that he was fairly tolerant. Like he wasn't actively trying to kill pagans for holding pagan sacrifices. So of course they still went on, but no longer with the blessing of the state, right? If that makes sense.
Is there a woman involved anywhere?
There's not a prominent. He doesn't have a prominent wife in terms of influencing him toward the faith. At least not that I read about.
It reminds me of Esther.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just a
Yeah.
immediate switch.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We're going to refer to this later, but Cyrus, king of Persia, Nebuchadnezzar's conversion, king of Babylon, right? We're going to look at some of those things. Yeah. He banned crucifixions. For obvious reasons, right? And he became a great supporter of the building of Christian churches. So these are all actions that he took. I'll tell you I'll show my cards up front. I think that whatever he experienced was something real, because he made many real actions that would have actually gone against the grain of his own society by doing them. Yeah, Darren.
Just as we're going through this, before we started, you asked what comes to your mind when you think of Constantine. And I was just thinking history the whole time. I was like, I don't know if this is history from high school or history from college, but this is exactly what's being taught today, because this is exactly what I remember. It seems like I remember being taught Constantine was a genuine man of Christian faith and did all these amazing things. I'd be curious, where was that?
You can help me out on this. Tom was my high school history teacher. Maybe it was just our curriculum. I don't know where I picked this up, if it was just, I mean, obviously I was kind of a nerdy teenager to be interested in this stuff, but I remember any references to Constantine as being negative.
A little bit suspicious is a little bit, but I think there's some projection that occurs there.
Mm-hmm.
If you, as a Christian church, which is largely, careful, Tom, largely the experience of a lot of people in the 80s and 90s, if you see God as somebody who makes your life better, rather than somebody who should be worshipped on his own right, who also does make your life better, that kind of projection can go into how you view other people's relationship with God as well.
Right.
And there's no doubt in my mind that Constantine saw this as to his benefit. Everybody who comes to Christ hopefully sees that to their benefit. That's the way Jesus presents it. It's the pearl of great price that you find and you would sell everything for. But I think there's a shallowness to some of the experience of Christianity in that time period that got transferred back to Constantine a little bit.
So I'm talking largely right now about the positive benefits that were downstream from Constantine. In a little bit, we're going to talk about, it's a lot more of a complex situation, because what happens when the church suddenly becomes a massive supporter, when the state government suddenly becomes a massive supporter of the church. So what is the name of our church? This church. Heartland, keep going. Evangelical Free Church. Does anybody know what the name Free Church, does anybody get asked that often? What does that mean, Free Church? You don't have to pay money to get in the door? That's not what it means. What does it mean, Free Church? Free of state control. So the Free Church came out of the Scandinavian state Lutheran Church, right? When did the state church thing start? Constantine, right? So the people who founded our denomination thought it was better to not have formal connections between church and state. We'll get into all this. I'm just giving you a little preview. So it's a complicated. In some ways, you're exchanging one set of problems for a different set of problems, right? Somebody said in life, there's no solutions. There's only trade-offs.
Because you still have simple people.
Because right,
You can
right.
imagine that, when Christianity became politically advantageous to be part of it, the opportunists who would have come to the table with these, one step away from being a martyr, scarred and broken people who had followed Christ at great cost. And they're sitting at the table with these political opportunists who just, see this Christianity thing is my way to the top. And they're trying to share.
And this is what you're describing is exactly what happens. Yeah.
I mean, of course there's suspicion. How are you not suspicious of an opportunist?
Yeah.
Of course you are.
You're describing exactly how this plays out. But again, the slide that we had up a couple slides earlier I think is important to acknowledge. I should have had this later, probably. Much later. Well, I must have gone past it. The slide that says, if we fail to understand, the conditions that these Christians were coming out of, we're not going to have, maybe we're going to be more harsh in judging them for jumping on this train so enthusiastically. Does that make sense? I somehow lost that slide. Okay. I appreciate how you guys are interacting with this. Okay, so where are we at in time? This might, how late did he go this morning? It wasn't super late. This might be a good place to stop because we're going to open a whole nother chapter if we keep going. Just started the music? Okay. So one of the legacies that Constantine is most famous for is something called the Council of Nicaea, or it's sometimes called the Nicene Council. So this will be humorous, not surprising. When Constantine decided to convert, and I'm just saying that he had some kind of official conversion. When he decided to convert and favor the church, he discovered something that shocked him. The church was involved in pretty significant conflicts already within it, right? It's like a lot of new believers, right? You come into the church and you think this place is going to be awesome, and then you get inside it and you're like, oh, there's arguments going on inside this place too, right? And this disturbed him and surprised him, probably shouldn't have. One of the first great conflicts that he discovered was already going on. Actually, it was just starting as he was coming into power. So what's called the Donatist controversy. These names sound boring, but they're really interesting. North Africa was one of the greatest strongholds of the church at this time period. And also was one of the areas that was most fiercely persecuted under the previous emperor Diocletian. Keep in mind, it's 10 years before that Diocletian is issuing edicts to try to wipe out Christians, right? So a number of Christians in North Africa, other places too, but under the threat of official government execution, they renounced that when they were dragged out of their caves, dragged out of their catacombs, said, you have to pay a pinch of incense to Caesar or we're going to kill you. Quite a number of them said, oh, okay, I'll pay a pinch of incense to Caesar so that they didn't get killed. That happened. I don't know the percentage, but it happened, right? If all of us got dragged, some of us we don't know who would stand up to that and who wouldn't, right? But a number of them had renounced their faith. So now that Christianity no longer comes with a death sentence, many of those former apostates, the people who fell away, they are feeling very guilty. They're feeling very sorry. They want to ask for forgiveness. They want to be received back into the church, right? Does that make sense? In 313, so Constantine he won his battle of Milvian Bridge in 312, took the throne in 312. In 313, a new bishop is elected over the church in Carthage. A bishop was typically a church leader over a large urban area. Carthage was a big city in the empire in North Africa. So a man named Donatus was elected to the position of bishop in Carthage. Donatus said, No way we're letting these people back into our church. They're traitors. They failed us. They failed, more importantly, they failed Christ, and we're not letting them back in the church. Other Christian leaders at the same time and place, they appealed for mercy, for leniency for these people. They said, they pointed first to Peter, right? Peter betrayed his Lord and was received by his Lord back into fellowship. But you can see why this was a real, for the people who lost their whole family to death, or maybe lost both of their hands, and now these people who are unscathed, they want to get back into the church. Like, you can see why that was an incredibly emotionally charged situation, right? So the church in North Africa was really torn over this controversy. People began to line up on one side or the other. The side of Donatus saying, no, we're not letting these people back in. The other side saying, yeah, we need to let them back in. So the dispute became contentious enough and widespread enough that Donatus traveled all the way to Rome, where the head bishops were, to make his case for why these people should not be allowed back into the church in his province. And the bishops in Rome ruled against Donatus, and Constantine backed up the bishops in Rome. He put official law behind their church court decision. And Donatus was, as you can imagine, very angry, and his famous quote was, "What business has the emperor to do with the church? Why is he meddling in the church's affairs?" Okay, that's probably a good place to stop. Any thoughts or ideas or questions or?
Clearly politics all over this.
Yeah.
He's buying and running countries.
Right.
Doesn't exempt political.
Right. Next week, we'll get into the implications. We'll try to get into the implications, even modern day implications of American politics, right? It's not that hard to think that there's disputes in the American church about what kind of national leaders are going to be good for the church, not good for the church, good for Christians, not good for Christians. Can a national leader save us from paganism? Can they not save us from paganism? Can they turn the course of the nation? Can they not turn the course of the nation? Right? These are live questions. I would say there's a reevaluation of Constantine going on, even among evangelical Protestants, because we're realizing, oh, it would be kind of nice to have a Constantine right now. Somebody who would outlaw bad stuff and promote good stuff, right? And I think it's worth looking at how these people wrestled through these questions, because in some ways, some of the same questions they wrestled with are some of the same questions that we're wrestling with. Yeah.
One thing I think about is that amazing thing that happened to Eve before that battle, how God sovereignly intervened.
Mm-hmm.
Very obviously sovereignly intervened.
Right.
I wonder why then, and think of the massive
Right.
things that happened.
Is the verse in Proverbs that said, the king's heart is like water in the hands of the Lord, right? Do we believe that? So if that's true, I don't think we can strictly look at events like that as random or strictly from because he had a bigger army or he had a smaller army. I think we have to say that God is sovereign in all of these things in a way that we can't always discern why or what it means. but we know that he is sovereign. So that's one thing I want us to consider. And another thing, the Christians had, number one, they didn't see this coming at all. They really didn't have anything to do with it, right? Except maybe these Christian guys in his army who are like, I think God's trying to send you a sign. So you have the faithfulness of some actual Christians in his army. But other than that, it's not like the Christians just grabbed hold of the levers of power and started moving things around. It really is, I would have to say, an act of providence. Maybe we'll leave it with that. So, JJ, would you close us in prayer?